You're lying in bed right now. Maybe not literally, but you know exactly what I'm talking about. There's a mattress beneath you. There's a pillow under your head. There might be blankets. There's definitely a frame holding it all up off the ground. It's comfortable. It's familiar. It's so normal that you've never once stopped to think about whether beds are actually a new invention or if humans have been sleeping on them forever. The answer might surprise you because the truth is, humans spent the vast majority of our existence sleeping on literally anything except beds. For roughly 300,000 years, give or take, humans didn't have beds. They had the ground, they had rocks, they had leaves piled up if they were feeling fancy, and they fell asleep anyway, night after night, for thousands of generations without a single mattress, which means either beds aren't actually that important or something changed. Something in our behavior, our thinking, or our ability to create shifted us from ground sleepers to bed sleepers, and the story of how that happened is weirder than you'd expect. Let's start with the obvious question. Why would anyone invent a bed in the first place? The answer isn't comfort. That comes later. The answer is survival. See, sleeping on the ground isn't just uncomfortable, it's dangerous. When you're on the ground at night, you're vulnerable in ways that don't happen when you're elevated. Predators can reach you easier. Insects can crawl on you. Moisture from the earth seeps into your body and steals your heat. Your spine is pressing directly into rocks and roots and unforgiving earth. But here's the thing that most people don't realize. The earliest bed-like structures weren't invented to be more comfortable. They were invented to be less deadly. Around 77,000 years ago, in a cave in South Africa, archaeologists found something remarkable. It was a layer of bedding made from grass and leaves and plant material. But this wasn't random, scattered vegetation. This was organized. This was intentional. This was the first evidence that humans had figured out that you could arrange materials to create a sleeping surface. And the plants they used, many of them had insect-repellent properties. They chose plants that would keep bugs away. They weren't thinking about comfort. They were thinking about survival. They were thinking about the mosquito that might carry disease, the spider that might bite, the parasites that might burrow into their skin in the middle of the night. The bed was born from fear, not from luxury. For thousands of years after that, beds remained basically the same thing. Piles of vegetation. Maybe some animal hides if you were lucky. The wealthy might have gotten a slightly thicker pile. The poor got whatever was available, but the concept stayed consistent. You gathered material, you made it into a layer, you slept on top of it. Then morning came and you either left it behind or you shook it out and used it again tomorrow night. Everything changed around 10,000 years ago when humans invented agriculture. Suddenly, we weren't moving every few weeks chasing animals. Suddenly, we were staying in one place. Suddenly, we had time to think about things like comfort. We had permanent homes. We had the ability to store materials. We had the space to build something that would last longer than a single night. And that's when beds started to evolve. The ancient Egyptians were probably the first people to really take beds seriously. They built beds with wooden frames. They used materials that weren't just functional but actually comfortable. They understood that if you're going to sleep in the same spot for years, you might as well make it nice. They even had different beds for different occasions. Beds for sleeping, beds for sitting, beds for the afterlife, because Egyptians thought beds were so important that they carved them into tombs. They wanted to sleep in the afterlife too. Meanwhile, in Mesopotamia, the Sumerians were doing something similar. They were building bed frames. They were using wool and stuffing. They were thinking about the problem of how to make sleep better. But here's where it gets interesting. Most of the world didn't follow suit. Most humans continued sleeping on much simpler arrangements for centuries. Thousands of years after Egypt had fancy beds, most of Europe was still sleeping on piles of straw. In Asia, many cultures developed different approaches entirely. Some people slept on raised platforms, some on mats. Some continued with ground-based systems but made them more sophisticated. The modern bed, the one you know today, didn't really show up until the medieval period in Europe. And even then, beds were a luxury item. Most people didn't have them. They slept on straw. They shared beds with multiple family members. The wealthy had 4 poster beds with heavy curtains because those curtains weren't decorative. They were functional. They kept heat in. They kept the cold out. They created a smaller space that was easier to warm with body heat. A medieval bed was basically a room within a room. Then came springs. The invention of metal coil springs in the 1800s changed everything. Suddenly, beds weren't just platforms. They were systems designed to distribute weight and provide support. Mattresses went from being glorified pillows filled with straw to being engineered systems with specific support properties. The bed became scientific, and for the first time in human history, the majority of people in developed countries could afford something resembling a comfortable bed. But here's the thing that's actually kind of wild. That entire journey, from the first grass beds in South Africa to the memory foam mattresses you can buy today, took place because of a single simple realization. Humans sleep better when they're not sleeping on bare ground. That's it. That's the entire reason beds exist. Not because we're lazy, not because we're soft, but because when you're elevated, when you're insulated from the earth, when you're off the cold, damp ground and onto something that holds your body heat and keeps moisture away, you sleep better. You recover better, you stay healthier, your brain works better the next day, and for prehistoric humans, that meant the difference between dying from infection and surviving another week. So the next time you lie down on your bed tonight, remember that you're participating in a technology that humans spent 300,000 years developing. You're using the accumulated knowledge of dozens of civilizations. You're benefiting from the work of engineers and scientists and manufacturers who spent centuries figuring out how to make sleep better. Your bed is the result of humans asking a simple question: how can we survive the night? And then spending millennia perfecting the answer. That's pretty remarkable when you think about it.